Hello, and welcome to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
Opie.
Opie. So we've got a guest tonight. Opie, you might have seen him chatting in our chat, and you might remember him from the end of the stream on Tuesday as well. Now, Opie has kindly agreed to come on and talk to us about naturalism. So there are different kinds of naturalism and different definitions of naturalism. So I think that's where we should really start. And in fact, no, before we get there, Opie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself so people can know your background?
So right now I've been working as a machinist for about 9 years. But I've been in college for quite some time on and off, just trying to get degrees and stuff like that. But I've mostly a focus in paleontology and philosophy of science, both of them. Um, I've been on digs in Montana before, digging dinosaurs. I've worked in a small museum lab prepping the fossils as well. But for the most part, right now, I've been just working and reading and self-studying since COVID at least, because I haven't been enrolled since COVID dropped.
Oh yeah, I bet that's put a big stunt into your study and into many people's, but especially yours. I guess your study is a lot more practical than a lot of people's.
Well, the physical science part, yes, but the philosophy part, I can just constantly read and read and read and read.
Yeah, it's actually great to have you here because obviously, whilst we call ourselves the sci-fi stream, and because we do discuss philosophy and science, there is a big emphasis on the philosophy side between the two of us, and we only sort of cross over into the scientific world occasionally when it's relevant. Whereas, I mean, tonight we're actually doing something that really does jump back and forth between philosophy and science.
Really.
So let's start with what is naturalism?
I'll tell you what it is. It isn't the belief that people should walk around naked outside. It's not nudist though.
Damn it. I was just about to get naked.
I've heard that is a common use of naturalism for human action. But no, when it comes to philosophy and science, there, there's two kinds, mostly methodological and ontological, and each of those has their own extremes of each other. So, like for methodological naturalism, we have there's the moderate view is that the belief that uh, science only can study nature or natural processes. It cannot ever affect or study supernatural claims. It's kind of like Stephen Jay Gould's idea of non-overlapping magisteria. You'll notice that scientists that are religious or have religious backgrounds are able to use methodological naturalism while still holding on to their supernatural beliefs in a weird compartmentalized way in this moderate form. And then the extreme form, sorry, the extreme form is more of the belief that science is our best way of finding knowledge, so that we should probably apply it to other forms, not just the natural sciences, but the social sciences. We should use the same rigor towards philosophy itself.
That's interesting, actually. So, when you're talking about applying it to things like social sciences, how would that work?
First, we should probably start with like what the natural sciences do really, really well, their virtues. Um, Graham Opie and other philosophers have noticed that there's four virtues that um, described in different ways, but it's commonly done to these. Is one is uh, predictive accuracy and precision is one of the virtues. You've noticed that there's a lot more rigor. If you predict a hypothesis, it should come out exactly as you predict it to be. Another one is explanatory efficiency. It means that it's basically Occam's razor. It's like you don't want too many assumptions that are unjustified with your hypothesis. Another one is optimal flexibility to falsification. So we're not going to go full on Popper where it has to be falsifiable to be tested and stuff like that. There's certain things that, yeah, if you have one error in your measurement, it's not going to throw out the entire theory. But you also don't want to go and ad hoc reason away, say, every single time there's an anomaly that falsifies your theory. And then the fourth one is just rational coherence, which is like, is do the premises validly lead to the conclusion that you were constructing in your theory?
Yeah, fair.
So then when we apply this to like social sciences, we would hope that they would take up these virtues as best as they can. We know that there's so many variables within sociology, but at least try to be as rigorous as natural sciences in their ability to predict and explain the world.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose with a lot of them, it's a lot more complicated and more complicated to test, even really. I mean, how would you go about doing tests as much in the social science world as you would with a natural science?
One way, try in as many ways as you can, and ethically as well.
Mm.
You know, double-blind placebo tests studies, having tighter p-value standards than just 0.5. If you need that in explanation, there, it's let's say you do 100 tests. With 0.5 p-value, you should expect that it's accurate 95% of the time. And if you get anomalies, fine, but 5% of the time is fine. It happens, especially with humans, because humans are unpredictable.
Yeah, I mean, our biology and psychology and everything like that is can be vastly different. I mean, even going back to um, more natural science, I guess, or taking a look at something like medicine, you can see how the same medicine can affect people in such different ways. Or look at COVID. Look at how some people are completely asymptomatic and some people feel absolutely awful for weeks or months, and others get in coma and others die. And there's so many different things that can be variables with it. Actually, with COVID, what would we say that the p value of like the main effects were on that, because it's so drastically different?
I would say it's too early to really say anything. We'd have to do meta-analysis after meta-analysis, maybe 5 years from now, to see what actually happened during now. I mean, yes, it's urgent that we need the answers now to save lives, but to get the full picture, it'll take some time.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Far too many variables. So with that in mind, with something like we were to think how we would apply it to something like ethics, it's hard to test ethics ethically.
Yeah, or empirically, basically. Yes, it is. So in I'm not much knowledgeable in ethics, but from what I've read, like it should just be useful to inform our ethical decisions, because everybody has values um, that we adhere to, but it should be somewhat grounded within reality and not just some ideal that we're trying to strive for. And
Indeed, and obviously you can use studies, for example, studies on abuse to help inform our ethics. So we can see how there is sort of a link between science and ethics, but yeah, it's not something that you can really do an experiment on people and go, right, this country, we're going to test this ethical theory, and this country, we're going to test this one, and this one, we're not going to put any ethics in. And, it would be quite unethical to test ethics.
I also wouldn't try to go so far as like Sam Harris's route while trying to like square that circle of is-ought distinctions. It's difficult to get through those anyway. So rather than doing that, just use what we do know that is, and just help us know what to do or ought to do.
Yeah, that's fair. So that's basically methodological naturalism, isn't it?
Mm.
So what's ontological naturalism then?
So it's a broad term, and it gets mixed up with physicalism and materialism quite often. It usually just means like all that exists in the extreme case, all that exists is natural processes and natural entities, that no supernatural entities exist. Whereas physicalism just deals with like physical properties, whereas naturalism still allows for non-physical entities to really exist. They just are explained by some natural process. So like our minds are non-physical, but they are explained by the natural processes of our brains.
That was exactly what I was just going to ask. You got to my question before I asked it, because we've been doing our thought experiments and things like that recently. So things like Mary's room are fresh in my mind. And yes, you can explain things physically, but obviously it's not exactly completely physical.
So that's the nice part about ontological naturalism versus physicalism. You don't have to go so hard into that. No, granted though, there are naturalists that do that. Alex Rosenberg, I believe, is one of them. He believes that all there is fermions and bosons, effectively. All of us reduced down to that. Like, there's no such thing as a table. A table is just a bunch of fermions and bosons.
It sounds quite reductionist.
It does.
Would ontological naturalism be the same thing as metaphysical naturalism?
In a sense, yes. Like if people use different words for everything, and it's difficult because like if you go into a different school, like school of philosophy of theology versus philosophy of science, you're just going to have overlap of use of words and stuff like that.
Yeah, interesting. As with everything, it's not that simple.
Like if you see naturalism in an art scenario, you're going to get a completely different view too. Same. Oh, and then same with like novels, because then you're going to get Thoreau and Aldous Huxley and stuff like that. They're naturalistic novels and stuff.
You've actually had a comment come in saying, if everything is only fermions and bosons, what about skyrmions?
Well, that's a good question, but that you would have to ask Alex Rosenberg, because I don't subscribe to the level of naturalism.
Nice to see you, Cafe. I hope I pronounced your name correctly there. Yeah, so what we were discussing at that point in time wasn't actually a position that was being held. It was quite a reductionist point of view of naturalism held by Alex Rosenberg. So as Opie says, it's a great question. Ask him. So, sorry, carry on.
The third thing that we should probably get into is it's similar to the methodological naturalism, the second one where I said it's called naturalized epistemology, where Willard Quine came up with this early on, where he believes that both philosophy and science have the same aims towards truth, but might do and should use strive in a naturalistic explanation of these aims for truth, rather than the traditional epistemology ways, which was more like Cartesian in nature, like trying to use justified true belief. it's more towards looking at the evolutionary explanation of how creatures ascertain knowledge and use it to to live, basically.
Hmm. You look like you were about to say something there, Dave.
No, no. I was just thinking it sounds sort of like a kind of pragmatism.
Yes, a lot of the natural epistemologists, it's a form of pragmatism, in a way that it we don't need to deal with the problem of induction right now. It's just about it's like the science of science almost in the sense there, or the science of philosophy in the sense there too. You're testing philosophical claims empirically.
Hmm. So, just to briefly recap, um, ontological naturalism is essentially that everything can be explained by natural processes. It still allows for things that aren't physical, like physicalism is everything is physical. Whereas ontological naturalism allows for things like the mind isn't completely physical but can be explained in physical terms. And Dave raised the point that metaphysical naturalism is very similar to ontological naturalism. And then there was methodological naturalism, which is a bit more of almost like a scientific investigatory form of naturalism. Is that right?
More of like the epistemology like tool version. It's how to do how to get knowledge or how to ascertain truth, whereas uh, metaphysics deals with like concepts of what is and what isn't in the universe. So
Fair. So, do you ascribe to either of those yourself?
um, at this point, a mild case of ontological naturalism, where not the higher reductionist, and definitely a naturalized epistemology. I'm trying to apply uh, a naturalistic virtue towards other things, including philosophy of science. I'm trying to do. I've noticed there's a lot of not doing that in certain things that I'm working on right now. So I've found I've found a niche where I can publish basically. If one, I like it, and two, it's something that I'll be known for then.
Yeah, nice. What problems do you actually see with but both forms of naturalism, though?
So one of them is it's similar to the problem of induction, where like you can't use empirical claims to test empirical claims in a sense. Like it gets circular um, in your reasoning with I naturally apply uh, like natural methodological naturalism to methodological naturalism, and how do you justify that? Um, it's the question there. And then for ontological naturalism, there's multiple different problems with it. One of them is a lot of people point out what is the distinction between natural and supernatural. Like you'd have to find a way to define what supernatural is, and how would that actually exist in this world, and would you be able to even show supernatural claims to exist? And if there is no distinction between the two, then you're not really saying much of anything. It's like nature is natural. Then it's like, okay,
Yeah, so they both almost enter a bit of a tautology to an extent. They are because they are.
which I got another one is the way we you can go the postmodernist route. Taking any of these is where like truth is there's very skeptical of truth. This is a very skeptical version of what truth is even capable of being. Whereas then to explain it in natural forms is uh, down into language of how humans are going to explain it. This can get into relativism. This can get into social constructivism of how to construct knowledge. It's not naturalistic processes, but humans as social creatures are constructing these scientific theories. Those
Now,
are the criticisms.
but you mentioned truth there, which has made me wonder, what is there a particular theory of truth you lean towards?
Being mostly closer to a hybrid of empiricism on a heavy side because of my scientific leanings, but I will allow Kant's form of rationalism where synthetic a priori truths can be found. But in the debate between the rationalists and the empiricists of the past, I would probably lean towards Hume over Leibniz.
Fair. There any other key issues with naturalism that you can think of?
Not off the top of my head right now, no. Those are the bigger ones. Is you can't. There actually I have one. Eugene Scott, if you've heard of her, she was part of the Kitzmiller Dover trial. She is part of some Association for American Science. Tries to get schools to teach evolution and not creationism. She believes that supernatural things can be tested, and that's she has a beef with methodological naturalism in the weaker case. Whereas the same with like a lot of the new atheists actually, where Christopher Hitchens would probably agree with this statement. I sort of do. In some cases, there's some pragmatic things that it's not like you don't need to be testing scientifically on everything for that. And also like certain, it's not really you're testing the claims that are supernatural. You're actually just testing the belief of those supernatural claims mostly. Like it's impossible to find that there's God. It's just only possible that your belief was false in it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I still don't fully think that you can scientifically test something supernatural, especially when it comes to something like a deity, like one of the omni gods. I mean, you can find logical inconsistencies with it, so you can sort of give arguments to why it doesn't work. Hi, Kevin, by the way, nice to have you back. But unless we're talking about actually the supernatural having a physical presence, I don't know how we can really test for those. So what would you say to that? Do you think there's any way we can test for them?
Oh, and it's similar to like you can't. Yeah, it's like you can make a test for testing prayer or to that God, but like there's so much underdetermination on the other side, on that supernatural side. You don't know if it's that God that failed to give you this prayer. You don't know if it's another God that failed to give you this prayer. So to say that the Christian God wasn't there to give you the prayer, it's kind of difficult in that regard. I find it you can't, if you searched the whole universe and did not find it, like you still wouldn't be able to answer this question because of what's outside the universe.
Mm.
Something.
And they have actually done studies on the effectiveness of prayer, and with people in hospital, and people who either there were three groups. I got three wrong on my hand. There were three groups. There was the first group who knew they were being prayed for, the second group who didn't know they were being prayed for, and the third group who were not being prayed for. And the people who were aware that they were being prayed for actually had a slower recovery than the others. And they thought that what actually happened was because they believed themselves that God was going to heal them, they stopped almost fighting themselves and trying to will themselves better. They had put it in someone else's hands. But yeah, I mean, people still will go back and forth and talk about miracle healings and all of that sort of stuff. So we got a couple of comments. Cafe says, if you're defining the supernatural as that which is not natural or that which defies the laws of physics, then you're essentially defining the supernatural out of existence.
It's like a physics approach, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if if you do take that sort of physicalist approach, then yes, you're right. But if you understand a difference between metaphysical and things that are wholly physical, then are you really defining it out of existence? Another way to think of defining it is something that is above the natural world. So again, I don't think you're necessarily defining it out of existence, but it's a fair enough point.
Even if supernatural things do exist, it's also the belief that like these things don't have any direct effect on at least the physical world or the natural world.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about a more deistic style god, where before there was anything, there was this deistic style god and it kickstarted everything and then basically fucked off. That doesn't necessarily define it out of existence. It's basically going, before there was physics, there was this thing that started everything.
The issue with that, I would love to hear what Lord Brian has to say with this, because I don't know his form of deism, but what I think of deism, like there should be a naturalistic explanation for everything then, including this beginning of the universe. So then to say that a god started it, that should also have a naturalistic explanation.
Well, I'd agree with you, obviously, but then I don't believe gods exist, so of course I'd agree with you. And I also think it's a more simplistic, if we're going to apply the razor, it's a more simplistic explanation that things occurred naturally over time than there was some, non-physical being that created all the physical. Yeah, to me, I find it a harder pill to swallow, but I understand that others don't.
Not necessarily has to be simple in its explanation. It just has to be it has just a string, a complete string with no gaps in it of justified inferences from one from the other. You can start from physics to get to chemistry, to get to biology, to get to sociology. Whereas if there's some break where some deity did it, then there's no way to justify how that happened.
We got a couple more comments. Leon says, I don't think it rules out the existence unless you define existence as that which is strictly in accordance with the uniform laws of nature. So that's basically what we are saying. Unless you take a physicalist approach, you're right there. Kevin says, isn't it a bit weird to study prayer effectiveness? I remember reading any religious philosophers arguing that anyone thinking God answers prayers, like if you were his customer buying his favors through prayer, is either arrogant and thus not a good believer, or deluded because God doesn't work that way, or at least they say. And I'd have to agree with you there as well. I mean, depending on the particular God belief, it's generally thought that God has a plan, and everything goes according to God's plan. So by praying and asking for something, you're essentially either asking him to change his plan or saying, can you do the thing that you were going to do anyway? So asking for someone, I mean, generally it's thought that more prayer should be done to give thanks and love and stuff like that, or ask for understanding of certain situations, rather than actually change your plan for me. So yeah, I'd have to agree with you there, Kevin. Cafe says, what kind of prayer? Usually when I hear these arguments coming from atheists, they're invariably referring to intercessory prayer and completely overlook the efficacy of contemplative prayer. So obviously I'm talking specifically of people in hospital being prayed to get better. That's essentially it. That's all I am talking of. I completely agree with you. There are definitely different kinds of prayer, and actually people who are praying to their God ought to do as you say. Almost see it as a form of meditation, if you will.
You'd be surprised on how many people just do that. You could synonymously and replace the word prayer with something like that on everyday life. You find that in that level of meditation in martial arts, in fact.
Yeah, I remember that. As a kid, I did karate because I watched the Karate Kid, and I wanted to be the next Karate Kid.
Like karate or like taekwondo?
No, it was actual karate.
What kind?
I think it was called Dao Shao or something like that. But I was like 8 or something. So apparently it translated to big small or something like that.
Yes, but that's like one of those more obscure schools, then I would have to say, because when I hear of like karate, I hear there's three from the main Okinawan, and then there's one from mainland Japan, and that's the one that I've been doing since I was 6 years old so far.
Oh, nice.
So,
yeah, I mean, I only did it for about 6 months, and I stopped because I made someone cry. And I didn't like the fact that I made someone cry, and it made me feel so bad that I stopped karate. So yeah, Leon confirms Bryant doesn't believe God intervenes. He believes God has everything planned out, at least on the understanding of his position. Yeah, I mean, we do want to get LB on to have this conversation with him. And of course, if you want to come back on and have the conversation with us as well, I'm happy to get all of us in here and have a decent chat on it. So Cafe says that's also my understanding, which if you take seriously could be interpreted by the block universe, that all moments are already fixed prior to existence. When you're praying or asking for something, this is intercessory prayer, which isn't the only form of prayer that is. Yep, that's fair enough.
we could go to Lewisian modal realism there and just screw around at that level of blocked fixed realities and move on to another multiverse if we wanted. Our prayers affecting some other multiverse's existence of me.
That's really interesting, actually. I think that's gonna really overcomplicate the matter.
I wouldn't be able to test it in this world, that's the nice part about naturalism is like, yeah, we might be a brain in a vat, but as long as the models work pragmatically here, that's all that really matters.
Yeah, I got into a conversation with someone on Twitter about knowledge, who I think you were actually in the conversation, Opie.
Andrew?
Yes. And he was saying that he only defines knowledge as a rationally justified belief. And I was like, sort of missing out, for one, rationally and justified. You don't really need to say both of them. I mean, if your belief is justified adequately, then it is rational. So why you're saying rationally justified? If it's not rationally justified,
an irrational justified belief,
which I'd say was unjustified.
Maybe phobias would be, but are we rationally able to respond to phobias? Would you call that rational or irrational?
Well, phobias are largely irrational fears, aren't they? So, yeah, generally they're considered irrational all round. So I don't know how any other way you'd sort of explain it. I mean, people can explain why they've got that fear, an experience when they were kids, or a learned fear off of their parents. Generally, if your parents reacted like to a spider, you grow up with that reaction. It's a learned behavior, and you end up with a completely irrational fear because of your parents' irrational fear. but if we're thinking about a belief, so if I was to justify my belief as my dad said this about a topic that he has no expertise in, I would argue that is actually unjustified because it just hasn't gone through the processes of justification to say that it is justified. Perhaps this is just a semantic issue where I would regard something that has been rationally justified as just justified and something that is irrationally justified as an unjustified belief. So I can understand why he might put that in there as a qualifier. I guess that's just not the way I would see it or use it. But both work as long as you can have that communication and say this particular thing.
Maybe then we could reframe it like the irrational justified beliefs aren't beliefs, just gut reactions. You bang your knee or stub your toe, you have a rational reaction to the pain of it or getting tickled. Same with experiencing like a spider on a wall. It's a reaction, but your belief and fear in it, it's not going to harm you, but just that gut reaction. Yeah.
You could almost go with the fact that it's irrational if we go down that in that note. There's no real reasoning going on, so it's yeah, it's an irrational fear, but an irrational belief. See, this stuff can get really complicated.
You know your fear, you're afraid, and you know that there is a spider on the wall, and you know your reaction of it, but is there any of it justified?
But you can justify why you're reacting that way. So you have the knowledge of your fear, but yeah, okay. I sort of get what you're saying, though.
That's what I was trying to get with Andrew, but I went a different route with him on that conversation, which was kind of fun.
Yeah, I mean there are different theories of knowledge anyway. I can't even remember what my original point was at that point. I don't know what
we all tried to show that there are things that we don't have we can rationally believe in that aren't verified yet.
Yeah, and that was the other side. He thought that you needed verification to have a rational belief, but then he also used verification with something else as an explanation. Whereas we're verifying, oh yeah, I've got video evidence of this happening, but he would speak to the reliability of his friend, which actually I wouldn't regard as verification. I'd call that logical reasoning. You haven't actually verified it. You haven't had that physical verification in place. But I still don't know what my original point of bringing up that conversation was. I've got so lost in the conversation.
Dave, do you have anything to add for what I've said today? I'm really interested in your opinions.
No, I'm just fascinated listening, to be honest. I kind of generally tend to soak stuff in when it's other people talking.
Me too, because like when it's a topic that I'm not well engrossed in, like ethics, I leave that to the philosophers of ethics, whereas my focus is on philosophy of science, which works on different ways.
Yeah, my philosophy of science is quite minimal, which is why I'm just fascinated listening.
The rabbit hole that I've been trying to get out of is the realism and anti-realism debate, and that's been taking a lot. Trying to read everything there.
I've dipped my toes into it, but I don't know that much about it. At the moment, I sort of tend to lean towards a kind of anti-realism, where think of it in terms of sort of like a kind of property dualism, where we're actually just describing the higher level properties rather than describing the actual reality of the physics itself. Does that make sense?
Yes, I've been more on the agnostic side, which there's two ways. There's Arthur Fine. He made Noah, which is NOA. It's the natural ontological attitude. He it fits in really well with natural epistemology, where we are fine with how successful science is, but we shouldn't really care on a pragmatic level whether or not it's really true to capital T true or not, because it works.
Yeah,
You,
I take that attitude as well, especially with the whole problem of induction. It's interesting, but science works, and we should use it as long as it's working.
I think you mentioning pragmatism has actually jumped into my head why I brought up Andrew, because he, under different theories of knowledge, especially like the JTB, he was like, well, I don't think you can have knowledge then. He almost went down the route of epistemological nihilism, because he thought that there's no way that we can actually verify something as true, because we could be brains in a vat. And so my point on that one was we should take a pragmatic approach to it, and we go within the confines of our reality that we understand, we can demonstrate this is true. Like you say, with science, it works. You know, yes, we are aware of the problem of induction, but at the end of the day, it works within our reality. Like the 5-minute hypothesis, like as you mentioned, Opie, it can have a lot of problems. If actually the world did pop into existence 5 minutes ago, but again, the science works for everything that we're saying. Yes, it appears to be wrong, but our entire history has been written back. So it still works for the reality that we're in. So when you're thinking about knowledge where it has some form of truth to it, like the JTB, you can argue that pragmatically you can think of something that is true, at least within this reality. But then obviously there's other theories of knowledge to consider as well. I suppose almost the fallibilistic approach combined with a bit of coherence theory is probably a bit better than using the JTB. But the JTB is like that finger in the air.
And I've noticed that most people don't subscribe to correspondence theory or reliabilism either. It's more of like those two like end up being worse off than fallibilism and coherentism. Fallibilism and coherentism actually more appears to be like a synthesis between empirical epistemology and rational epistemology.
Actually, speaking of that, Dave, within our Facebook group, I don't know if you saw where I tagged you into that conversation with Alan earlier. Opie, you don't have Facebook, do you?
Nope, not
It's
for a decade now.
a shame. I'd love to have you in our debate group.
Maybe I'll think about trying to get back into all kinds of different social media. It's difficult to keep all of them in track.
No, it definitely is. I think Dave's got a great approach to all that sort of stuff. He generally doesn't touch it until he's got a bit of time in the evening, and you know, there can be days that go by where we don't hear from you.
I spend all day studying and all evening relaxing.
Yeah.
And social media is antithesis to relaxation.
Yeah.
I've learned that in most cases, yes.
Yeah.
Especially in any conversation having to do with Duke.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, I find Duke more rational than Randolph and Aaron Ra.
He just stubbornly doesn't accept afterwards. You can lead the horse to water, but you cannot make him drink it.
Yeah,
it gets frustrating after that point.
yeah.
And I'm not trying to force him to drink. It's just that, like, come on.
Yeah.
He'll accept a bunch of premises right up until he's realized he's accepted them, and then he just does a U-turn.
Yeah. It's awfully frustrating. I've seen you both having conversations with him actually, where I've just been like, wow, they've opened him up. Oh my God. I mean, I've never had such a positive conversation with him. And then you check back later and you go, oh,
The Socratic method only goes so far.
And like whenever somebody needs a clarification, I'm always happy to restate my claim on there if it didn't come off right the first time. I won't assume that they're just not getting it or they're being unfaithful. I'll try again to explain myself.
I'm with you there. I think that's a positive way to do it. Not everybody understands the same thing in the same ways. Some people can be really good with overly technical terms. Some people need metaphor and imagery to try and get something, and some people need some like really firm examples to get an idea across. I mean, we even try to do that with our articles. There are so many articles that we've got, which is saying the exact same thing in a number of different ways, just in the hope that, depending on who reads it, might go, I get it now. And then they can go read the other one and go, right, yeah, now I can see it's saying the same thing. I just didn't get it because it wasn't explained in that particular way. Just to catch up, though, quickly, Cafe says, well, if you're going to propose a multiverse, then one could simply propose a block multiverse eternalism. And Leon says, Andrew and I continued the conversation about knowledge in our DMs, and I managed to somewhat convince him of the philosophical definition of knowledge. So when you say that, which one? Yeah, because I can think of 5 off the top of my head. I assume you mean JCB, but because that's the general easy go-to one. Maverick says, Cafe, don't you believe in free will? And Cafe says you're a compatibilist. Cool. I think I agree with a form of a compatibilist approach to free will. I recently wrote an article on it called Free Will and Determinism. So if you're interested in my thoughts, check out answersinreason.com and just have a look for free will and determinism. I'd be really, really, really interested in folks' thoughts on that one, because unlike these two, I am a layperson. So I try really hard to raise myself to their levels, but I must admit I'm nowhere near their knowledge and understanding. So it'd be really great to have people there poke holes in it. But I have admitted throughout the article some holes in my understanding. So perhaps you can provide something as well. Leon confirms that, yes, it was the justified true belief. Yeah, fair enough. Seeing as we Sorry.
Continue.
I was just going to say, seeing as free will has come up, what's your thoughts on free will?
It's more on the compatibilist side. I've set aside that question constantly. I just focus on what I like to focus on in philosophy. You don't have to love all of philosophy or have time to study all of philosophy.
There's so much to study that it would be almost impossible to have an opinion on every single philosophical idea.
Yeah, I know everybody probably it's going to be a growing number of veganism in the future. I'm predicting that, but I'm setting aside any contemplative work on that for right now, because I would like to focus on what I want to focus on.
Yeah, makes sense. Definitely. I mean, especially as you are working towards something specific as well. So
you're specialized.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you're not going to have such a general approach. Whereas me, I just start thinking about things and start having conversations with Dave, and Dave goes, you need to read this, this, and this. And then I read it and go, Dave, I don't understand.
Well, I have sort of a general idea of lots of stuff because my master's and my undergrad was really broad. But I tend to focus mostly on things like ethics.
Which is probably why I talk the most about ethics as well, because that's most of the conversations we have.
Reading your blogs, though, because they're exactly what people do need in terms of bridging the gap between academic and layman understanding. I have my foot camp in 2 different worlds, being a machinist and trying to study something more academic. I deal with coworkers that, after high school, they just went to trade school and stuff like that. So, like, yes, they have a good understanding of trig, but if you try to have a conversation about Socrates and Euthyphro, like, it's going to glaze over on their eyes. But like, if you try to explain like a Gettier problem in terms of a clock in a room, it clicks into their heads pretty quickly.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's one of the things I'm trying to practice at the moment. Like you say with the blog, I'm trying to find a way to kind of bridge that gap where, because I figure if I can explain it simply, it kind of reinforces to me that I have a rough idea of what I'm talking about.
It's Feynman's was it one of his virtues, he said, is if you can explain it to a fifth grader, then it shows that you actually truly understand the
Yeah. If you can explain it in the simplest of terms, then you know what you're talking about, basically.
Hmm. A couple more comments have come in. So Maverick, nice to see you here, by the way, Maverick. Says, I'm unable to grasp how free will does not exist when we evidently do have a choice. Well, the compatibilist approach is that the universe is deterministic, but we do have a limited sort of free will. So it's not like a libertarian or non-causal free will. So I think the three of us here would agree that we do have some form of free will. However, people that argue against free will would make statements like you are completely trapped by things like your biology, your knowledge, your experience, and everything like that. So every choice you make is the choice that you would always make. You have the illusion of free will, the illusion of choice. You wouldn't ever choose anything like that. Now, obviously, that is none of our positions, but that's just trying to explain to you why someone would say that. And if you do think about the universe in a purely physicalist way, where everything is done by the laws of cause and effect, then that is why you would have that argument. But I would say that a physicalist determination doesn't necessarily impact our psychological determination, because it can be shown that whilst you can explain the mind in physicalist terms, there is something more to it than that.
Yeah. The determinism thing basically comes down to the idea that physical events cause physical events. The physical causes the physical, and all that there is physical causes and physical effects. And the mind is mental, and therefore it doesn't. The mental properties have no effect on the physical properties. They are affected by the physical properties. So, how would we have any form of free will if mental causation can't affect physical processes?
Interesting. He says you think it's virtually impossible to prove determinism. The science right now sort of leans towards the deterministic nature of the universe, with at the quantum level it being more probabilistic. What we don't know is if it is actually probabilistic or there is a deterministic cause that we're not aware of. So if you say it's virtually impossible to prove determinism, I mean, that is the way science is leaning at the moment. We've also got a new person in the chat as well. Uzi Alku says, until you need it to justify kalam. In what way? Sorry, that seems a little bit out of the way. I think the kalam is a logically valid argument. I just don't think it's sound. There's issues with the premises. I'm happy to go through my thoughts on that with you if you like. Also, if you want to listen to how I've already gone through it, we've got a video called Knowledge and Certainty under the Fresh Air playlist. Not Fresh Air SciPhi, just Fresh Air. And we go through the different theories of knowledge, which is quite relevant to how the conversation's gone. And then I address, or we address, should I say, the kalam and the teleological argument and... what was it? The ontological argument, I think, at the end. So yeah, not that I'm trying to send you away right now, of course. I'm happy to have the conversation if you're interested. You should look into Michael Hoffman's ego death theory, which I think you can find on Google. Are either of you aware of that one?
No, and also I'll be 2 minutes. The dog wants out.
Okay, that's fair enough. So Maverick says, "Yeah, I do. It makes sense. I do agree that we have free will, but it's limited. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the way I lean. I think that's the way a lot of people who look into free will actually end up reasoning, but they have very different forms of compatibilist theories as well. They all justify them in different ways. So it's very an interesting topic, but it's one of those ones as well that you can get lost thinking because there is no decent answer to it. It's you can't make a statement and go, well, it's definitely that. Which is why I can understand why you, Opie, don't actually address that one that often yourself, because it's a bit of a waste of time with the goals that you have.
One thing that I think I have addressed, because now that you're getting me thinking about it, it's me as an individual, even if my mental processes are determined, they're still mine and not anybody else's. And therefore, any of my actions are still morally culpable to me to some extent.
Yeah, I have.
And I can't, other people can't be blamed for my action.
Yeah,
Other, at least, once we, otherwise we would just be a Borg hive, like the Borg, and we're not the Borg.
see, I do agree with you there that they're almost. If there is, if all there is, if we're living in a hard deterministic universe, it does almost remove agency from morality. So morality in a hard deterministic universe has no real meaning in the way that we currently understand morality because it assumes agency. But you still have to make people, as you say, culpable for their actions. Otherwise, everybody might end up doing negative things. That's why we almost need the laws in place, because there are some people that don't have the same sort of moral compass and will do these bad things. Yeah, I mean, that's the other impact on free will. Is I think I am biased towards having some free will because I don't like the idea that morality means nothing. So catching up again, Cafe says, do you mean it's impossible to prove hard determinism as opposed to an adequate determinism? Hard determinism is more fatalistic, that all action is etched in stone. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if you actually look into determinism, hey, hello, Papa. There is determinism, predeterminism, and fatalism, and they actually split up. So determinism is, cause and effect. Predeterminism is everything has been decided in advance. So for that, you'd almost need to have a deity that had decided the plan. And fatalism is more along the lines of it doesn't matter what you do, the next thing will happen. So it doesn't matter if I pick up this spoon or I pick up this glass, the next big event won't be changed and I'll knock over this regardless of whether I pick up a spoon or a glass. Or, I mean, that's a really overly basic way of explaining that one.
Okay. I think a good answer towards this would be your sense experiences are not always determined. They're sometimes underdetermined, or at least my recollection of memories, or my attempts to explain what happened just 5 minutes ago is underdetermined in some way. And because of that, every second in the current present is still maybe determined, but the future isn't. So your decisions on that based on your past experiences.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'd almost say that the more experiences you have, almost the less free will you end up with, because we often say old people get set in their ways, and can't teach an old dog new tricks and all those sorts of things. And that's almost like saying, once you get to a certain point, your choices become incredibly limited. I had a family member who, in her old age, she basically, it was a what's it sandwich every single lunch. That was it. That was what she had, because that's what you have at lunchtime. There was no choice left, and if she didn't get a what's it sandwich put in front of her at the right time, it was all sorts of problems.
What is a what's it sandwich?
What's it's a crisp or a chip, like Cheetos.
Fair enough.
But yeah, that's what she used to love. But you can sort of see that, whereas you compare it to an infant, obviously one that can move around, so maybe a toddler, they have so little knowledge, so little experience, so little understanding, that you can't even tell them not to touch this thing because it's hot, because they won't understand, and they'll touch it, and they might touch it again and touch it again, and because they don't have that sort of knowledge in there that tells them. Whereas you get to an adult and you go, well, no, I'm not going to touch that because it'll burn me. And technically that's removing a choice from you, because you have the understanding there. Anyway, in terms of science leaning that way, can I ask you what your thoughts are on AiR? I don't know. Do you know what he's talking about there?
I've heard of it. Maybe read
I've heard
read
of
the
it.
chat.
Yeah. So unfortunately, Maverick, we can't give you an answer on that one right now. But if it's something you're interested in having a discussion about, I'm sure that we can spend some time looking into it and give you an answer in the future. None of us are afraid to say that we don't know, as has just been demonstrated. And sorry, we don't know. Maverick also has responded to Cafe saying, ego death is definitely a concept I look into because it fits in with some of my studies on the source of immorality. It refutes the concept of us being able to act and suggests that we only react, and then creativity shouldn't exist.
It has to do with philosophy of mind. It's orchestrated object reduction is what OR. And just a cursory look at the Wikipedia. It's the objective reduction of biological theory of mind that postulates that consciousness originates at a quantum level inside neurons.
Interesting. Well, I mean, if it's then at a quantum level, that the quantum realm, as far as we know, is probabilistic rather than deterministic. So that would then tie in to the fact that, if it does originate there and it does scale up from there, then that would also indicate that we do have a form of free will, because we have our most probable action, but we might not necessarily do it. I mean, sorry, go ahead, Opie.
We could look at this more at it's difficult to use examples that we use in science for explaining, like theories to explain natural processes in this regard, but it's kind of like we can use Newton theory on macro scale objects that are not going super fast, but we can't use it on the super tiny, and we cannot use it on the super fast. We have to use some other form of paradigm. But we can probably reduce consciousness all the way down to the naturalistic way, which, I mean, yes, definitely. But when you extrapolate it back up to some pragmatic way, it probably is explained in a different paradigm, and or at a less tedious way.
Yeah, I definitely have to look into it more. I mean, I've just given a brief answer on, limited understanding. Definitely something for me to look into and address in a future stream. It's great. I like it when people pose questions to me that I don't know the answer of, because it means I have to do some more research. So yeah, he explains that Quantum Consciousness by Sir Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, as you mentioned. Evidence has supported that via experiments using anesthesia. Interesting. Definitely interested in that then. I will have a definite look into that then. Thank you. It's always great to have people bring up stuff like that. So yeah, I'm with you. It sort of ties into how I think of free will anyway. So it's nice that there's actually potentially some evidence that supports it, even if it's not conclusive. It's quite nice. So Cafe says that's why I'd recommend reading Belskar. The hard determinist simply sees any desire as inevitable, that while people think they're doing things and making choices and exerting their desires, in fact, according to the hard determinist view, no such thing has happened. Everything is according to a divine will, or if you're not partial to the religious term cosmic law. So on both of those, I think you're almost going between predeterminism and determinism. I'd say if it's done by a God's plan, then it's all been predetermined. Otherwise, it's just happening sort of through the laws of cause and effect. Then it's determinism. Both of them are much of the muchness. So that's the problem with things like hard determinism. It's basically you have the illusion of choice, the illusion of free will. And obviously, if you take a fatalistic approach, it doesn't matter what you do, the end will happen anyway. So it's not necessarily that your actions are completely determined. It's the conclusions of each action are determined. And Maverick says it also suggests consciousness is related to vibrations of microtubules as opposed to neurons. I've subscribed. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts on Orcar. Yeah, wicked. Thank you for the subscription as well.
Thank you.
Always good to have someone there. Someone subscribe. Yeah, hopefully, you can even come on and have the conversation with us as well, because it sounds like a topic that you've actually looked in. So whilst we will look into it ourselves, perhaps you can school us.
What I studied doesn't really have neurons surviving over millions of years. So my philosophy of mind and my neuroscience is very limited to just some introductory classes rather than, an expertise in this field.
Basically functionalism. No, I'm the same. My philosophy of mind is basically limited to things like Chalmers, Papineau, and functionalism and things like that.
Yeah.
Oh, and Cafe's going to subscribe as well. Thank you very much. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Yeah, always great to meet some new people and have some conversations that I really wasn't expecting to come up today. I do love how these streams do go sometimes. I mean, we start off chatting about naturalism, and obviously that led into knowledge and truth, and now we're on free will and determinism. I mean, it's brilliant.
The best kind of conversations are the free-flowing ones.
Definitely.
Let's switch it up by asking everybody if they observe Lent, what, not either of you two, but even chat, if they observe Lent, what are they giving up or trying to change for the next 40?
And did they have a choice in making that change? Yeah, no, fair enough. Let's go with Opie's question. Are any of you observing Lent? And if you are, what are you giving up?
For Lent, I'm giving up Lent.
There you go.
Yeah, I did that quite a few years ago, and I've managed to maintain it. I didn't just give it up for Lent. Brilliant. To be honest, I've really, really enjoyed tonight's conversation. I didn't expect it to go the path that it's gone down. It's, in some respects, it's almost thrown me off.
Yes, it threw me off a little bit too. But I hope I did well because like I was a little bit nervous with
Oh
everything.
no, it was fascinating. I learned loads. Thank you.
This is the first time I've been like actually live trying to explain something, to an audience.
It feels weird, doesn't it, the first time you do it?
Yeah. Well, actually, I even said to Dave before we started our first stream, I got really anxious. I mean, I used to get really anxious when we were doing the podcast, and that's not even to a live audience, it was just with us. And I used to have a lot of Dutch courage before doing the streams. And sometimes when we went on really long, you can hear my voice get more and more slurry. And when we first started doing the live streams, I used to have quite a cup. I'd have a couple of beers and a whiskey before we came on, just so that I could calm myself. I mean, today all I've had is a cup of tea, 2 cups of tea actually. I'm a little bit more comfortable with it, but I still was shitting bricks for some reason, for some unknown reason, before we start the stream.
It might be even more significant because it's your stream rather than just being a guest on a stream. That it's your creation then.
Yeah, oddly, I find it a bit more worrying being on someone else's stream. I'm fine. I'm generally better at making a prick of myself to my audience, if that makes sense, because people have been watching our streams and things like that, and we've got a rapport. So I mean, this is apart from Tuesday, like this is the first time we've had a proper real chat. We've communicated in text, or you've been in the chat and I've been talking to you. But we've got that rapport there, and you know how much of a knob I am. Whereas if I go onto someone else's stream and I'll say things in the way I might say them on here, it could quite easily be taken in completely the wrong way.
Everybody who watches this already knows we're idiots. When we go to somebody else's stream, we're expected to know things.
So Maverick says, sorry, no, go for it. I'll get to what Maverick says in a bit.
But no, I do know when you guys are trying to joke around, which is very helpful sometimes. If you were with somebody that was more auritic, they would be taking it a lot more personally.
Yeah. It's we especially in England, I have noticed this isn't the same going to other countries. In England we do have a lot of banter, and we do say things that to each other that at times sound incredibly awful, but we mean them in the best way. And saying the same thing in other countries can get you into some real trouble and make people really upset and really offended. And obviously with the internet being so international and being out there in the public, you can get onto someone's stream and say something that you think, oh yeah, I'm just being a bit of a knob, and it's taken that you're being this absolute wanker, and people can get really wound up. Hopefully I haven't actually caused anyone that sort of impression. I'm sure I have, to be honest. But hopefully I haven't.
Where I live, children call their parents cunt in an affectionate way.
Yeah, well, it's the same with us, all right, you horrible cunt. It's that's a positive term. You say that to someone. I mean, cunt, especially in America, is taken as like the worst word that you can say. There is no positive connotation to saying cunt in America. It's always taken as a negative thing. And interesting, you can go to other countries which, I mean, Australia, I find a lot of Australians use very rough language. But again, it's all used in a friendly way. Maybe that's because they're, closely related to us. And we're all a bunch of cunts.
They're thieves that have descended from us, so they stole our language.
So Maverick says, I'm not Christian, but I respect Jesus taught the truth. I may actually consider giving up eating meat for 40 days. Interesting. I actually did veganuary. So I gave up all animal products for January. It was difficult. It was an experience. It taught me a bit about my diet, and I actually think I might have a problem with dairy. So I'm finishing off all of my protein powders and things like that that have dairy in them, and I may then give up dairy. I also found I don't miss meat as much as I thought, but I definitely missed fish, and I really missed cheese. And I know cheese is dairy, so what I'm going to do is sort of get rid of every dairy product except for cheese and see if I still have the upset stomach. But yeah, good on you giving up eating meat for 40 days. It's an interesting one to do. See how you feel. The thing I found though with going vegan was that you end up replacing so much of your meat with carbs, and I actually tend to eat a very, very low, at least starchy carb diet. I will eat a lot of veg, but my plate is like mostly veg with a bit of meat. And I tend not to have much in the way of potato or rice or anything like that. And if I do, it's only once or twice a week. So I actually put on about 2 or 3 kilograms going vegan as well. And I wasn't, necessarily overeating, but it was what I was eating didn't agree with my body as much. And the wife actually had to stop because all of the things we were eating to fill up all the legumes, your lentils and various beans and things like that to try and fill up your plate didn't react well with her. She has some tummy troubles. And whilst she can have some of that occasionally, she found that, having it every single day was too much. So she actually only got 3 weeks into it, and then she just had to stop because she was in so much pain. So it's interesting how our makeup is so different. There are people that thrive on a plant-based high-carb diet, and they do really, really, really well with it. And there are others that just really don't. And it wasn't for what we were eating. We weren't eating a lot of processed stuff. And I'm an ex-chef from a long, long time ago. I know how to cook, and it was interesting cooking different meals that I hadn't cooked before. But yeah, but give up whiskey for Lent? No. I mean, some people might argue that I don't drink proper whiskey because I drink bourbon. But, it's still a form of whiskey, and it's the best kind in my opinion. Oh dear, I think we lost Dave. Oh no, he's coming back.
Hello.
Damn it, my internet was doing so well tonight as well.
Yeah, actually, we only had one blip, like right at the beginning of the
Right
last
at the beginning.
Oh well. So you notice digestion is much better, and you needed less sleep when you tried a pescatarian diet for 3 weeks. Do you know, it's interesting. Going pescatarian, I'd agree with you. I mean, that tends to be the way the wife and I do actually eat, because we found a low-carb pescatarian diet works really, really well for both of us. We both got different tummy troubles, but eating that way is absolutely fantastic. One thing I did notice about the vegan diet as well, I had a bit more energy at night, which was really annoying because I suffer with insomnia anyway. And then I was just like, I'm just awake. I'm awake. But I'm sure if I'd continued with it, maybe that had, leveled out and normalized or whatever. But yeah, I'm with you. I think eventually I will end up going pescatarian, maybe dairy-free pescatarian. Yeah, and I love fish, and there's so many different types of fish, so you've got so many different flavors and so many different things you can do with it. It can replace the meat in anything. You can have a fish curry, can't you? You're not excluding yourself from that sort of thing. So yeah, interesting. What about you, OP? You brought up Lent. Are you thinking about giving up anything?
Soda. Well, we call it pop here, but soda. I'm going to be giving up, and then I'm not going to be using show streaming services of any kind, like Netflix or Hulu or stuff like that. I'll
Nice.
try. Even though I spend a lot of time reading, I want to spend that extra time that I waste on shows doing more productive things.
That's fair. I think lockdown has been one of those things where I've ended up watching more crap than I would have before. I mean, we don't watch terrestrial TV, but we do have streaming services and stuff like that. And I think because of lockdown, because we've got into a bit of rut of boredom, we spend so much time watching crap that we probably wouldn't have watched. Sometimes we get into an amazing show and it's actually like you feel like you've done it, but there are so many times we've sat there and we feel like we've wasted the evening. And like you say, that time would be so much better spent reading stuff or editing shows or something like that. Did I notice being less lethargic when I woke up? You love your sleep and a deep sleeper, and you notice a big difference in being less lethargic. Actually, yes. So whilst I suffer with insomnia, when I finally do sleep, I am also a very deep sleeper to the point where nothing will wake me up apart from myself. Or oddly, whispering. I've found if someone whispers, I will wake up. Someone can shout, someone can play music, do anything like that. Nothing. But someone whispers, and I'm like, But yes, I did. Going vegan, I noticed that in the morning I found it easier to get up. So even though I was more wired at night, I found it much easier to get up, and I wasn't having my morning coffee. So I didn't even need that boost. I'd just have a glass of water or a herbal tea. I was like, didn't need the caffeine in the way that I do usually. So it's interesting how diet can affect you in those ways. What I will say, though, is if you do go fully vegan, be prepared for stomach upsets for the first little bit whilst your body adjusts. Yeah. Have you, either of you, ever gone vegan or vegetarian or anything like that?
No.
Yes, but
I love my Polish food too much. I cannot go away from all the processed sausage. So
that's fair enough.
I already have enough food allergies that limit my food. I'm not going to limit it anymore.
Yeah, I think that's the same with Katie. Obviously, she can't have gluten or dairy, and she struggles with legumes and starchy carbs, and it gets to the point where, oh right, so if she goes vegan, she can basically eat broccoli and kale.
I'm in a similar position.
Yeah. So
the thing I'm allergic to is amoxicillin and penicillin style antibiotics. So
That's a pretty bad allergy, though.
Was worse in the 90s, I'll say that, because the alternatives for antibiotics were very, very limited back then. So if you had an ear infection or a fever as a child, that would be a lot more difficult for you to get through. But now it's
well, yeah, that is a pretty bad one. I think I'm quite lucky. I don't actually have any allergies really. I mean, I've got asthma, so you know, my lungs try and kill me, but I don't have any food allergies or anything like that, or medical allergies. But I do have diverticular, so I have to limit the amount of sort of starchy foods. So I have to limit my bread, my rice, my potato and stuff like that, and try and eat lots and lots of veg and nuts like that. Otherwise I end up in a hell of a lot of pain. So I don't have an allergy, I've got a different problem that causes me dietary restriction. Right. Well, I mean, to be honest, I think that's probably a good time to put a pin in it. Unless there's any more questions or comments that want to come in from the chat whilst I'm running through this. It's been a really, really, really interesting show tonight. It's taken many twists and turns and gone places that I wasn't expecting it to, which is fantastic as well. I've learned a bit about methodological and ontological naturalism, and the links that it could have to, or at least the similarities with physicalism. And then we went on discussing various bits of knowledge and truth, and then we took a turn briefly into about ethics and free will and all sorts of other things. And I've even got some homework out of this show from a couple of new watchers, which is fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. And Opie, honestly, it's been wonderful having you here and actually being able to have a proper conversation with you as well. I hope that you'll come back on and teach us some more in the future.
Oh no, it was a blast coming on. I would be happy to if I could.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Opie. Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I learned loads.
But I mean, I don't know. I just want to say thank you to everyone out there who's watching and everybody that was getting involved in the chat as well. It was I love the engagement that comes off from doing these streams. It's really great being able to chat with different people with different ideas, and as I said, give me homework. It's really, really, really great. Again, really appreciative of you coming on, Opie. I hope to see you again. But for now, we're going to be signing off. You've been watching the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
And we will see you soon. And just for everyone, we will usually be streaming on Tuesdays and Thursdays at about 8 p.m. GMT. That's 3 p.m. Eastern. And at the moment, we are going through a little bit of a mix-up on the schedule because Dave is doing his new course. So some Tuesdays and Thursdays we will either be a little bit later or we may end up having to do a different day. But in general, keep your Tuesdays and Thursdays free. Good night, all.
Good night, everyone.